Awesome. Thank you, Sandra, and thank you so much, members, for joining us today. We are excited to have Charles Hill and Michelle from the FSCA joining us for our coffee session. We know members love to hear things from the horse's mouth, and so I'm always grateful to have the FSCA team here to support us and to provide valuable insights to our members. We have a huge amount of content to cover today, so I'm just going to do a quick introduction for Charles and Michelle before we move into the teeth of today's session, in which we are covering the AML, FICA, counter-terrorism financing challenges, and the grey listing and the like. So Charles is the head of FICA Supervision FSCA. FSCA since January 2020. Terrorism.
Brad, is that just me, or we are experiencing a general signal?
Sam, you're just breaking up a bit.
Yeah. Struggling there with signal. Sorry, Sam?
Sorry, have you got me now?
Yes, we do. We're better.
Before joining the FSCA, Charles was the manager of supervision and enforcement at the FIC for 7.5 years. And prior to that, he worked at the National Prosecuting Authority, where he held various positions in the Asset Forfeiture Unit and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Charles is an assistant at the High Court and obtained the following: B. Juris LLB, very, very qualified indeed. Michelle is a senior anti-money laundering and counter-financing terrorism specialist at the Financial Sector Conduct Authority in the Conduct of Business Division, and she's been at the FSCA since 2007 in various capacities. She holds an LLB degree and various other qualifications, and qualified as a FATF assessor. We really are looking to the input that Charles and Michelle are going to give us today, and as always, so grateful for their engagement and willingness to work with us and with our members. So as I say, we've got a lot of content to cover today. So I'm going to kick off with Michelle, who is, we're going to ask to provide us with an update on the grey listing since the update provided by Treasury in February. Over to you.
Thank you, Sam, Brad, everyone. Very nice to see you on this great Wednesday morning. Pleasure to be joining you. Yes, so let's discuss the grey list issue, probably the heaviest. Let's start with that and get that out of the way. I'm fairly confident all of you would have been following the progress South Africa has been making. There has been publications on the Financial Action Task Force website after every plenary. National Treasury has provided updates after every plenary. And there has been a lot of this information also shared recently at the FSCA's conference. But in a nutshell, we as South Africa had 6 outstanding action items as it pertains to the grey list, and the remediation date was February 2025. So if we met that date, it would have been fairly straightforward to accept that we could be exiting the grey list by June 2025. The specific action items that relates to the last scheduled report we filed with the reviewers had to do, first of all, with the issuing of remedial and enforcement actions that are, of course, effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. This applied to the FSCA as well as to other financial supervisors, as well as the Financial Intelligence Center. The second one was with regards to remedial actions and dissuasive sanctions pertaining to legal persons, beneficial ownership, transparency obligations. That's where immediate outcome 5 comes in. Thirdly, the action items dealt with identifying and taking action against unlicensed MVTSs, that I think is straightforward. Then we had where our law enforcement colleagues were very important and intrinsic to help with that action item, was with regards to having timely access to adequate, accurate, and up-to-date beneficial ownership information. Again, there's that immediate outcome 5 linked to that. And then the 2 last ones is what I'll also focus on, and that deals with demonstrating a sustained increase in investigations and prosecutions of serious and complex ML, in particular involving professional money laundering networks or enablers and third-party money laundering in line with our country's risk profile, and then also to demonstrate a sustained increase in the effective identification and investigation and prosecution of the full range of terrorist financing activities, consistent again with our country's profile. And I hope you can see the language that is used, demonstrating something, meaning you have to show what you have done. And it's not just showing that you've done one thing to tick a box. You actually have to show that you sustain the increase in your cases, to show that you're not just ticking a box, but you're actually doing the right thing. Your systems have changed for the better. All right, so those were the 6 outstanding items. And we usually have to, in terms of the grey list process, have to file reports every 3 months. And our last scheduled report was filed in December last year. So when most of you were having a nice beach holiday, the rest of us continue to work on the progress report. There's a lot of back and forth, usually between the jurisdiction being us as South African representatives and reviewers. And this goes on up to the point where they update the report, and that is then discussed in a face-to-face engagement between representatives of our country and the reviewers. That gives the opportunity really for the reviewers to ask clarifying questions, make sure they understand the statistics, the data, the narrative we have put forward, and that the information is factually correct. So that last face-to-face was in Windhoek in January. You can see it was quite early in January. And following that, the reviewers then go back. They finalize the report. It's circulated to the members of plenary, and then at plenary, which was now last in February 2025, the reviewers present their recommendations to plenary. And in the previous plenary, 4 of those 6 action items, the reviewers actually recommended that it should be agreed or accepted that South Africa has largely addressed those action items. So it's only the last 2 that were left. So as it stands today, the FSCA and other financial supervisors actually completed all the action items pertaining specifically to us on the grey list. They were either fully addressed or largely addressed. And those last 2 action items is what the country continued to work on, to the extent that another progress report has been filed. It was early March. Again, the whole process of back and forth, updating statistics, meeting face-to-face with the reviewers again, to the point that that report is then ready again for sharing with the members of the FATF and for presentation at plenary. Now, the next plenary is scheduled for mid-June, so it's only a couple of weeks away. And we will then wait to hear what the outcome is. Certainly, we don't want to speculate. We have always been cautiously optimistic throughout this process. So let's hear what the outcome is. And like I say, usually very shortly after plenary concludes, the FATF do publish a summary of the decisions made at plenary. And that is also followed shortly by National Treasury with the media statement. So that's where we are for today. But we would like to just sensitize you to the fact that whatever the outcome is in this or the next plenary, however it plays out, our country exiting the grey list is subject to an in-country assessment. And that's normal procedure for any jurisdiction that's in the ICRG process. And the in-country assessment is used by the reviewers to come to South Africa to see for themselves that all the things we have been reporting on in our progress reports during the grey list period, that is in fact so, the progress is real and it is sustainable. So it's not that they don't believe us. To an extent it is a formality, but we still really at that point in time have to be sure we are prepared. We show up, we give them the information they need so that we put the reviewers in the position to go back to plenary and recommend that we then officially exit the grey list. So naturally, this process is led by our National Treasury, and we have started on a very high level to apply ourselves to what could be expected of us at such an in-country assessment, so that we don't wait for number 99. We have to start work already. And this is the theme that you'll see go forward in terms of preparation for the next mutual evaluation. Right. Then let's move on to the next mutual evaluation. It's like it is a cycle. So some of us have been fortunate enough to have been part of the preparation, experiencing the actual previous mutual evaluation in person with the assessment team, contributing to the mutual evaluation report. After that followed what was called the POP-R. It was the post-observation period report that led up to the decision whether we would be grey listed or not, and if we were grey listed, how long the action item list would be, and then going through the grey listing process. So there are people in this country who has been part of that, and we think we have certainly learned some very valuable lessons of how the process plays out. Now, a mutual evaluation is not a once-off event, and public information, if you go to the Financial Action Task Force's website, their official website, you see that they penciled in the date of our country's next mutual evaluation. And that is planned for April 2027, with possible plenary discussion in October 2027. Now, it would be good for you to take note that you basically, in terms of the FATF methodology and timetables, count back about 18 months from the proposed or possible plenary discussion date. So 18 months before October 2027 is where the work will actually begin in earnest. A bit of useless information, but the assessment team is in fact selected by the FATF Secretariat 7 months before the on-site already begins. And they then start work on doing their own research, looking at the previous mutual evaluation report, engaging other jurisdictions, and then there will come a time when they will specifically engage us to make sure there's discussions about broad timeline of exactly when the next mutual evaluation will take place, date, time, everything, who should be available, and of course then the kind of information we should start preparing. The trick with that is, and I do think it's important to sensitize you to that, when a country prepares for a mutual evaluation, you can't wake up on the morning and come to the party on the day that they are in your country and interviewing you. The period of evaluation stretches back years before. So every single thing we have done yesterday, today, that we'll be doing tomorrow, will be in that review period. And that's why it's very critical that the work we do really well to demonstrate that we've learned lessons and we've really made progress, and we have enhanced our AML-CFT regime, not just from a technical compliance perspective, but of course from an effectiveness perspective as well. Lastly, just want to alert you to the fact that the FATF methodology for conducting mutual evaluations has been amended, and although there will still be, as in terms of the previous methodology, be a focus on the technical compliance, so the recommendations, the 40 recommendations portion, to some extent, really the assessment team will be focusing on effectiveness. In terms of National Treasury, as I said, they lead our delegation, and I have certainly started the process for us to think about, at least from a technical perspective, if there are any gaps in our AML-CFT legislative framework as a result of improvements we've made or as a result of changes to the recommendations themselves, so that we can start to fill and close those gaps without delay. It's high-level work that has commenced, but I think it's important that you should be aware of it. And yeah, that we don't know, we can't tell you of any specific legal or legislative changes that will definitely take place, but know that that work has begun, so that you can also participate in that process if there is changes to the legislation. Then we move on to how do we do this in practice. There are specific working groups that have been established. Now, these working groups, it's really the working groups that, it's the people involved are the people who worked, like I say, on the post-observation period, the mutual evaluation itself, the grey list action items. So it's people that's been in the know for a couple of years. So we're just continuing that same vein and use those working groups now to start preparation for the next mutual evaluation. We've indicated that our working group meets bi-monthly. I can assure you it's actually a lot more frequent than that. But the reason we have these discussions on a frequent basis is we have to make sure we understand the methodology, we understand the nature of the data and statistics that we have to collect, maintain, our case studies, so that we find it easier to present this information in appropriate format, supported by contextual narrative when the time comes. Because of the changes to the methodology, really one of the big changes was with regards to splitting out immediate outcome 3 and immediate outcome 4. Immediate outcome 3 now deals with both the supervision of financial institutions and the preventative measures that you guys as accountable institutions apply. And immediate outcome 4 does the same, but it does so in the DNFPP sector. What I want you to be aware of and mindful of is, however, yes, immediate outcome 3 is very important. Its foundation is on very specific recommendations in the methodology, but it certainly doesn't stand alone. So if you have a bad outcome in immediate outcome 1, dealing with your national risk assessment and things like that, it will impact your immediate outcome 3 results. If you have a bad outcome under immediate outcome 5, as it relates to beneficial ownership, it will impact the outcome of immediate outcome 3 or the results. So these are certainly interlinked. Bringing it a bit more closer to home, what is the FSCA doing? I think you have seen, those of you that were at the conference and through other channels have become aware that the FSCA established a dedicated AML-CFT supervision department that Charles is the head of. And it was pretty much this department that has been dealing with the reviewers, the grey listing action items, which is closer to the subject matter. And in this department of ours, we have also established a very dedicated team. So a smaller team that is focusing specifically on the work with regards to next mutual evaluation. And there we carry forward what is discussed in the working groups, what information and instructions we receive from National Treasury, and we bring it close to home so that the FSCA is in a good space come the next ME. There are specific items that we will be focusing on as part of the preparation, and this should be good news for all of you because you will be getting to know us a bit better. First of all, we will increase the number of on-site and off-site inspections, and I think it's one of the topics we'll cover today. Charles will tell you a bit more about what you can expect in an on-site inspection and so on. But the point is, you're going to see more of us, and it's part of us becoming an even more efficient supervisor. Secondly, it requires a review of the AML/CFT compliance returns. You are used to what we call the DPI, Directive to Provide Information. You've completed that a couple of times now. We are refining that return, and we will communicate with you when the time is right. We are doing work to expand on our awareness initiatives. So things like what we are doing here today, presenting to you, our webinars, our newsletters, even our initiative on AML Mondays. If you don't know what that is, it is where we broadcast AML/CFT related messages on Mondays on the FSCA's social media platform. So it's short, succinct, it's there to help alert you to your FIC Act obligations, to give you a couple of links to guidance issued to the by the FIC, or any other information that might be useful to assist you guys. We are reviewing our risk-based methodology. So like we expect you to review your RMCP and the like, we also have to do reviews. Risks evolve, and we have to make sure it's up to date, again, to make us a more efficient supervisor. Certainly, maintaining, updating statistics on supervisory activities and remediation and enforcement. You can see it's part of information that filters back into what we will be requested to provide to the assessment team. In any case, come the next mutual evaluation. We certainly are reviewing our sector risk assessment. You can look forward to that during the course of the year. And definitely because of that, we also contribute as the FSCA to the national risk assessment where there are reviews. So I hope this, in a nutshell, gives you at least an idea of where we are in terms of the grey list and what we are moving forward to in terms of the next ME. I'll hand back to Sam and Brad.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I think it's really important that members understand the umbrella that we find ourselves under in terms of grey listing, because that, I think, better explains or helps members understand the methodology behind the inspections and why you require certain information. And it's not just, we're deciding on a Tuesday to inspect. So I think the ecosystem and understanding is so, so important. And I think you've set the scene quite well for Charles. In terms of just a bit of more detail in terms of the on-site inspections. So Charles, in relation to these inspections, could you share what are the regulators' key focus areas and what common deficiencies have been identified that FSPs, in other words, FIM members, should actually address before the next inspection?
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, just to give you a bit of sense of what are we doing this current year, I think Michelle has referred to it. From an inspection point of view, we are conducting 140 inspections this year, this financial year. So it's from the 1st of April until the 31st of March. 100 of these inspections will focus on FSPs, you guys. We've got 30 inspections on the newly authorized crypto asset service providers, and then there are 10 inspections that we are going to conduct on your CIS managers. What we're focusing on from a inspection point of view is areas that we feel are lacking in the sector, in the industry in large. And I think, just to give you a bit of sense, what are the issues in the industry? What have we been sanctioning in the past 2 years? So in the past 2 years, we've issued 13 sanctions on institutions, mostly FSPs. There are two CIS managers involved as well. But all of these 13 sanctions that we've issued related to RMCP deficiencies. In other words, your risk management and compliance program deficiencies. Now, 11 of these institutions did have an RMCP, but there were technical issues on the RMCP. Now, what do I mean with technical issues? It means that they didn't cover all the requirements of Section 42(2) of the FIC Act. So Section 42(2) sets out what the RMCP should contain. And when we conducted the inspection, we found that some of these requirements are not in the RMCP. So that's quite important. In 2 institutions, we didn't find any RMCP. So, I mean, they were just totally non-compliant. So on the RMCP, where we found technical deficiencies, there are 3 things that stand out where people didn't, or FSPs didn't include in the RMCP. 1, related to reporting. So one of the things that you have to insert in your RMCP is how you will identify reportable transactions and how you will report that to the FIC. Now that's a common finding that we see in our inspections. So please be on the lookout for it. It doesn't help to copy and paste the provisions of Section 28, 28A or 29 into your RMCP. I actually want to know, how do you identify it and how do you report it? How do you identify a suspicious transaction? Please look at our sector risk assessments that we've published. It's on our website as well. I can also just maybe include a link on the chat box if that is fine, if you don't know where to go to on our website. But that gives you a very good indication what we regard as suspicious in the sector that you operate in. Use that and use that in your RMCP as well. The second thing that we found missing in RMCPs related to screening or scrutinizing of your clients against the targeted financial sanction lists. We don't find a lot of RMCPs making reference to it. Who's responsible for it? How often do you do it? And you know, what's the process involved? Are you using a system or are you doing a manual screening? So that's the second thing that we usually find missing in our RMCP. The third thing that we usually find missing in our RMCP is relating to freezing. And later today, we'll talk a little bit about freezing. But remember, if you have a client that's on the targeted financial sanction list, you need to freeze transactions. What do I mean with freeze? I mean, when you're not a bank account, if I talk about freeze, it means you don't execute on any instructions from the client. You can't disinvest any monies. So this is what we mean. But that's also what you need to specify in your RMCP. So those 3 big failures we found in RMCP. The second most common issue relating to sanctions that we've issued, apart from RMCPs, related to screening. So we found people that are not screening or are screening but don't keep record of screening. So in 38% of the sanctions that we've imposed, there were no screening done. There's no evidence that you screen your clients against terrorist financing lists or the targeted financial sanction lists. In 23%, we did find that people are screening, but they don't screen all their clients. We found some clients that didn't go through that process. So that eventually led to sanctions. So that's another focus area for our inspections. Another area that we look at and where we found deficiencies relating to beneficial ownership. Now, 50 or 46% of our sanctions were imposed on institutions where they didn't obtain beneficial ownership information. Now, this is quite a high number. We will talk a little bit later about the guidance that the FIC has issued in this regard. but beneficial ownership is quite important. We don't see that the process of elimination. We don't see that you get to the natural person who's actually owning the client. So that's also a major concern. Another area that we found lacking is just normal customer due diligence. When we ask for client files, we find no customer due diligence information in the client files. Remember, you determine your own prescription in terms of what information you need to obtain and how to verify that. So we actually use your own RMCP to see whether you've done it. Did you obtain an ID? Did you obtain proof of income? I mean, if that is part of your RMCP, we expect that to be in the client file. Another area that we found wanting in during inspections related to governance. Now, you will probably ask me, so what about governance? So governance has a few components to it. One of the things related to governance is the signing of an RMCP. Now, the FIC Act requires that the board or senior management has to sign off on an RMCP. Now, what we found in some of the inspections is that there is a signed RMCP, but that RMCP is not the one that's being used by the staff members. They're already on version 3, but the RMCP that's been signed off is only version 1. So that's a big problem. The second problem relates to your sole proprietors, or where people there's only one director in the company, in the FSP. So that person has taken on the compliance on himself or herself, but they don't know anything about the FIC Act. And because of that, there has been a lot of failures. They don't CDD, they don't screen. So that's one of the failures that we've identified. So 15% of our sanctions has been on governance issues. There were also a few smaller issues. I won't say this is a small issue, but I need to mention it. Implementation of RMCP. 30% of our sanctions related to implementation of RMCP. So what do I mean with implementation? Implementation relate, if you drafted your RMCP, you've done your risk assessment, you need to risk rate your clients in according to your risk assessment. So you will have a client that's high risk, medium risk, low risk. But we don't see that implemented. So your RMCP makes provision for it, but you don't risk rate your client. If you don't risk rate your client, you don't know what information to obtain from the client or how to verify that. So that's also one of the major issues. And some of the areas that we will be focusing on during our inspections. There has been some, as I say, but smaller issues. We don't see it widespread in the industry, and that relates to training. I think most of you are training your staff on the FIC Act and the RMCP, but there's only about 8% failure there. Source of funds, also an 8% failure there. Another area that you please need to be on the lookout for is ongoing customer due diligence. That's an area where we also find that not everyone is up to date with ongoing due diligence. So what do I mean with ongoing due diligence? I mean, after depending on the risk rating of your client, you need to verify whether there's any changes in his customer due diligence profile. So every year, 3 years, 5 years, depending on the risk rating of the client, you need to go back to the client and you need to ensure that there's no changes in his profile. And I think generally our sector is doing well in it, but we did find some gaps. Also, monitoring of transactions is part of ongoing due diligence, and we found some issues. So in short, these are the issues that we've identified and that we were focusing on from an inspection point of view. if we just maybe go on to the next slide, and maybe just to give you a bit of sense what to expect during an inspection. We do give you notice that we are coming. We usually make an appointment with you. We usually give you 2 weeks notice. We will write you a letter in terms of information that we want up front, information that you need to have ready during the inspection, and what you can expect after the inspection. Please make sure that the relevant people are available during the inspection. We will specify who needs to be there. It's certainly not everyone in your organization that needs to be there, but just make sure that you have the relevant people there as well. Cooperate with the inspectors. Answer the questions. Be frank with them. The manner in which you cooperate within a team carries a lot of weight. If you're difficult with inspectors, I mean, they're also human. You're probably going to get some negative findings just because of attitude issues. We have seen people giving us the runaround. We're trying to schedule an inspection. They either don't answer their phone, or they say they're sick, or there's an issue. They don't want us to come to the inspection. If you come up with excuses, that's where the red flags goes up, and where we then will try and make sure that we get to you, because if you don't want an inspection on you, there's probably something wrong. So just cooperate and let the inspection take its course. We issue you with the inspection report with all the findings. You have an opportunity to respond to the inspection report. If we got something wrong, you can correct us, saying, well, you got it wrong. So that when you issue the final inspection report, it's an accurate reflection on the inspection findings. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what you can expect during an inspection. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you very much, Charles. I think it definitely was a bit jarring in terms of, when FSPs decide not to take the call, just not to show up. I'd like to think that those aren't FIA members, and our members are willing to walk the journey and just work with the regulator, if that makes sense. Moving on swiftly, in terms of enforcement actions and trends, Charles, what has the regulator been observing across the industry? And what are the most frequent violations leading to regulatory action against FSPs? In other words, FIA members, for example.
Yeah. So, thank you. And I think enforcement has been part of the action items from a grey listing point of view, and Michelle has made reference to it. So it has been a focus area for us as the FSCA. From a grey listing point of view, they didn't say you need to impose more sanctions. But what they did say is that when you impose sanctions, it has to be effective, dissuasive, and proportionate. So those are the things that we had to look at, go back internally, and make sure that our sanctions are effective, proportionate, dissuasive. As I indicated earlier, there were 13 sanctions imposed. The total value of these 13 sanctions, that's since grey listing, so since February 2023. The total value of those sanctions were 36.5 million rand. So that's a lot of money. There are also reprimands and cautions and directives to remediate. So if we just divide it between the 13, so the average value of a sanction that we impose is 2.8 million rand for an institution. That's a lot of money. So I don't think you want to be at the space where we are considering sanctions, because I think most of the members won't be able to afford a 2.8 million rand fine. Bearing in mind that the sanctions we imposed wasn't just on small institutions. We also had some big institutions, and they got big fines as well because of proportionality. Our fines, and if you look at the 13 sanctions that have been imposed, ranges from about 200,000 rand from a small institution, and the biggest sanction that we've imposed in the past 2 years is 16 million rand. So yeah, that's quite huge. What is also, I think, quite important from an enforcement point of view is that remediation. So even if we do impose a sanction, we do also expect you to remediate the findings. And I think if you go to the sanctions that we've imposed, where people are remediating, we have suspended part of those sanctions to show that we've recognized that they are remediating the non-compliance. We suspend part of it. But just remember that remediation doesn't mean that we should not impose a sanction. And that has been highlighted in a few cases that served in front of the FIC Act Appeal Board. One of those is the Capital Point matter that you see there on the screen, where the Appeal Board said that the fact that a transgression has been rectified doesn't mean it was not a transgression and cannot or should not be subject of a sanction. So that's one. And I think if you go to the next slide, we have more matters that served in front of the Appeal Board, such as the Parsons matter and the Volvo matter, where they indicated that the fact that you now have remediated doesn't mean that we shouldn't sanction, but it does act as a mitigating factor. So we do go down if you are indeed have remediated some of the non-compliance. So the lesson learned is don't wait for a FIC Act inspection before you look at your AML CFT compliance regime. Look at it now before we arrive there, because you may still face a sanction despite a remediation after the inspection. One of the important, I think, highlights that I just want to bring to your attention was in the Tana matter, in the third bullet point on your screen. Now, in the Tana matter, they made use of a third-party service provider to assist them with their compliance regime. Now, accountable institutions that outsource their compliance support and advisory functions are reminded to exercise a heightened caution in placing exclusive reliance on third parties. And what the court has said, or the Appeal Board has said, that, yeah, you might have outsourced it. It might be a reputable institution as well in the Tana matter, but you are still ultimately accountable for the non-compliance. And still, they were sanctioned despite making use of a reputable company to assist them with their compliance regime. So the fact that you've outsourced it doesn't mean that you now you don't have to worry. You still need to worry. You're still accountable. I think the last few bullet points just indicate some of the most recent sanctions that we've imposed. I've highlighted some of the non-compliance that have been identified for which they have been sanctioned. But yeah, I think, you know, this is important to note. This is not something that's going to disappear once we're off the grey list. We still need to continue with imposing these sanctions. We're continually being assessed, as Michelle has said, from a FATF point of view. So this is the new norm, you know, having sanctions that are quite hefty, but it has to be effective, dissuasive and proportionate. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Charles, and really appreciate the insights. I think that's so hugely important, and that emphasis to say that this isn't just going to go away, even if we get off the grey list. I think to remind members of that is so important. I am very mindful of time and that we've still got quite a bit to cover. So I know we're going to hand over to Michelle, and perhaps, Michelle, you can give us an update on the various recent developments on guidance that have been issued by the FIC. I know there's been PCC 50A, Guidance Note 7A, which I think is of great importance to our members, as well as PCC 59 and PCC 44A. So I'm going to just hand over to let you cover
each of those items in the time that we have remaining, and just grateful that you will give us these insights. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Sam. So I'll be fairly quick on public compliance communication. That's what PCC stands for, 50A. It's a fairly newly published guidance. You heard Charles say that we found in certain RMCPs that the process to identify and to actually file a report of a transaction or an activity that is reportable to the FIC, we've observed shortcomings in that regard. And I think this is where guidance like PCC 50A is where you have the opportunity to plug those gaps. In a nutshell, I'm not going to read from the slide, but in a nutshell, the value that you bring, being eyes and ears to identify activities and transactions that are reportable, to actually file those reports without delay. That's the value you bring in the entire financial intelligence value chain. If you don't file the report of what you see, then the FIC doesn't have anything to analyze and package and ship off to our law enforcement agencies for investigation, prosecution, and conviction, right? Where you have failed in your obligations is what the or even struggle to understand your obligation in terms of reporting is what this PCC is addressing. Simply, you file not at all, you file late, you file an inadequate report, meaning the facts are not correct, it's not comprehensive enough, or when a report is rejected, you fail to remediate it. And again, those failures will cause a very big impact in terms of the effectiveness of the FIC's ability to analyze and ship it off to law enforcement. Sam, we can go to the next slide quickly, and I'll touch on Guidance Note 7A before I hand back to Charles, who will deal with the last two guidance products. Guidance Note 7A, pretty much the holy grail of guidance. If you don't understand what the FIC Act requires from you, if you find it difficult to read legislation, I know we're not all lawyers, this is your go-to document. So we used to have in Guidance Note 7, 7A has actually replaced Guidance Note 7. It's still as comprehensive in helping you understand the basics. What is money laundering? What's terror financing? What is a business risk assessment? What is a risk-based approach? How you can possibly, the approach you can take to risk rate your clients. Again, things that Charles has said that pop up in inspection findings. And it's unnecessary because you really have this guidance at your fingertips. If your risk-based approach is inadequate, if you don't risk rate your clients, your controls, your customer due diligence measures, the level to which you identify beneficial owners, what you do in terms of your process of scrutinizing clients against targeted financial sanction lists, those will have very little impact if you do not see the full picture. What this guidance note elevates, and it's not new, it's been in the FIC Act for quite a while, but it elevates, like Charlotte said, the importance, the significance of the role of the board or senior management where there is no board, and the accountability of that board. The FIC Act actually provides for sanctions that can be taken against the board and the directors of the board. Like I say, tale as old as time. It's been in the FIC Act for a long time, but it elevates and it brings to your attention and alerts you to the fact that please, as senior management or board members of your business, take ownership and understand the importance of the compliance with the FIC Act to protect your business and the financial system as a whole. And of course, then keeping your records. With that, I will hand back. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Charles. Back over to you to cover beneficial ownership and the implementation of targeted financial sanctions.
Yeah. So, there has been the PCC issued by the FIC on beneficial ownership. I know this is also one of the more complex things to do from an AML/CFT point of view, but this PCC that was published on the 8th of August is quite useful. So please read through it. It contains a lot of information on what information you can obtain to identify beneficial ownership. So make use of the PCC, go and read it. This piece is also known for introducing the 5% threshold when you're looking for the beneficial owner. So if you're the legal owner of the client, you actually need to drill down to everyone that's got 5% or more interest or shareholding in the entity. So that's been quite a topical issue, but it's a very important aspect as well. So moving on to the next PCC that we want to discuss, and that relates to targeted financial sanctions. That's PCC 44A, published on the 29th of February 2024. Now, this PCC is also very important. It relates to what is a targeted financial sanction. I mean, I've referred to screening or scrutinizing your clients against targeted financial sanction lists. So it does deal with that aspect. How frequently you need to do applying a risk-based approach in complying with this obligation. But also it does touch on what is expected from you, who are not a bank, who are not a sophisticated institution, but maybe a small FSP. Do you need to have a system to do the screening? Certainly not. You can do it manually. There is information on the FIC website that you can access, and you can just screen your clients against that list on the FIC website. Very important to retain proof that you've indeed done it. So again, a nice PCC as well to go through and just to elaborate on your obligations from a freezing and screening point of view. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Charlotte. And I think the point that you're making is, do you need expensive systems? And your response being no. We get a lot of questions from our members around the cost of compliance. And I think, again, important to acknowledge the level of complexity and the scale and nature of your business, and understanding your own risks, and recognizing that there are simple and free tools that can be used to do your screening, that there is a lot of information and resources available to accountable institutions to really support them through this journey, not only these guidance notices issued by the FIC, but from yourselves on the FSCA website. There is a huge amount of information, as well as the webinars that you have provided. We will be sharing these slides and this recording with all of our members. If there are any questions in the chat that we aren't able to get to or haven't been responded to through these sessions, we will look to share those with the FSCA and get that information through to members as part of that communication and correspondence. But I think, and this is a conversation that we've had with Michelle and Charles on numerous occasions, I think collaboration and engagement with the regulator is so important. Don't wait for that on-site visit.
Agreed.
You know, if you've got a query and you want some support, reach out to the team at the FSCA, who can really support you in helping you ensure that the work that you're doing is in the right direction, that you're appropriately addressing your risks. Don't just bury your head in the sand and not have an RMCP. Then you're asking for a fine.
Yep.
You know, these requirements have been in place for quite some time. And as I say, there is a lot of information available. But thank you so much again, Charles and Michelle. And perhaps, I don't know, from your side, you'd like to make some closing remarks?
I'll go very quick. I'll leave this with the audience. Please do not underestimate your role in South Africa's AML-CFT regime and the success and the effectiveness thereof. Your compliance is not for the sake of the FSCA. There's really a bigger picture. So when you buy into that, when you start to understand how significantly you can protect your own business that you've bled and cried for building, that's where you should get to. That's the bigger picture, and that will come to the fore again. You will be tested on your attitude towards compliance, how you've implemented preventative measures come the next mutual evaluation. You give us material to write good case studies to present to reviewers and to show to ourselves, our government, our nation, look, we are performing well, and we're conscious of our obligations. And I will leave with that. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Michelle. I think that's very valuable information and really important. Charles?
Yeah, I'll talk about all the scary fines, but my view is if I don't have to impose the fines, I'll be actually a lot happier. Because if the fine has been imposed and somebody has not complied, so there's a weak link in the AML CFT chain. I would like to present to the FATF assessors saying that the industry is compliant. From an industry perspective, we are doing everything we can to mitigate money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation of financing. But we need your support, and we can't do it alone. We can supervise as much as we want to. We can impose as many fines as we want to, but the message lies within compliance. And that's how we mitigate these risks. And that's how, as Michelle has said, making the country a better place. Thank you.
Thank you. And both of you, thank you again always for your willingness to support us, engage with us, work with our members, the time to prep for these sessions, discuss what we want to cover, the time and effort put into developing the presentation in time so that we inhabit CPD accredited and the time out of your busy days. We are so grateful and thank you very, very much.
And from my side, I can only echo the thoughts and sentiments of my comrade. And I think for members, as with all our coffees with Sam and Brad, if members either have left feeling informed, inspired, or relieved, then we've done our job. And I think today is all about partnership, understanding your role, our role as FSPs, as member representatives in the sector, and what role we can play to ultimately get us off the grey list and onto a healthier path. So thank you very much, FSCA representatives, as well as our members. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.